Back from Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody had a good week off. This is Mitch Weisberg. I'm here with Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch, and today we're going to be talking about why so many of our interactions, whether we're trying to get a child to do homework or student to do homework, or whether we're arguing with a spouse or debating a coworker, how come so many of those turn into toxic win-lose battles, where somebody, at least one of the two parties, walks away resentful. And if you look at some of the situations that take place, there's things that happen at home, right? A parent and a teenager get locked into a daily battle over screen time boundaries or doing chores, where both sides just dig their heels in, and anybody with kids has seen that, right? Or at school, a teacher and a student get trapped into a power struggle where the student isn't completing an assignment, or they're refusing to follow instructions, or they're sure that the teacher is picking on them, right? And then, in the office, those of you who are at work, colleagues clashing over a new policy or some schedule change, where one person insists, no, we have to do it this way. And then the other person is arguing, no, we have to do it that way. There's only one right way. And both sides, or all the sides, completely shutting down their peers. So, um, you know, I guess one of the big questions is, why does this happen? Why does the brain turn interactions into this binary mode where one person's right, one person's wrong? Um, and, you know, I guess it's a natural reaction that evolves, over millions of years. When we face resistance, our fast, automatic survival brain, which we call the limbic system, perceives that as a threat. Okay, the limbic system craves certainty and operates in a binary mode. So if we're doing something and somebody says you're doing it wrong, our immediate limbic system reaction is, this person is judging me, this person is criticizing me, and it's the same for the other party. When we make a suggestion to another person, their immediate limbic system is going to be taking that as, oh my gosh, this person is threatening me. I'm at risk here. This person is judging me. And then the our survival brain or our limbic system's the only two choices. You're either with me or against me. I can fight or I can flee. And because we feel threatened, we lose access to our prefrontal cortex, because when we're threatened, our brain gets flooded with stress hormones, and those stress hormones allow us to react faster, to focus on what we're doing, but they also reduce the ability of our resourcefulness, our critical thinking, our creative thinking, or executive function. We lose access to that. Um, so we're looking for facts or logic or authority to bolster our position, to force the other person to agree. And when we're listening that way and when we're talking that way, that then triggers the other person to use their survival brain. And that locks us into this destructive limbic to limbic battle. Now, a lot of this is due to a feature of our brains uh, that are called mirror neurons. And people, human beings aren't the only animals that have mirror neurons. They're in many primates and some animals. I mean, you've heard the term monkey see, monkey do. So you know that you know the apes and many of the monkeys have that capability also. Humans are very social creatures, right? And our brains are equipped with these mirror neurons so that we can subconsciously pick up and mimic the actions and emotions of others. And that served us very well, because when somebody senses danger in a group, the whole group can sense the danger. When somebody learns how to do something, we can copy what they're doing. Uh, it allows us to work together, and that's incredibly powerful. But when our mirror neurons subconsciously pick up that another person has fear or pain or anxiety or anger, our mirror neurons will trigger those exact same emotions in us. Or for the other person, their mirror neurons will trigger those exact same emotions in them. So when a person senses, oh, I'm being attacked, our mirror neurons are going to be leading us to attack back. And it doesn't just happen, when we're upset. Sometimes, we approach a person like completely innocently, right? We're genuinely trying to help. But if their amygdala lights up and they perceive our help as a threat or judgment, their resistance immediately triggers our defensiveness. So we say something nice, we look at their reaction, and we sense they're defensive, they're angry, they're anxious because of what we said, and then we get angry or emotional. So our natural reaction then, even though we went into the interaction as expecting we were going to be helping, when our mirror neurons pick up their emotional reaction, our reaction is also going to be fight, flight, or freeze. And whenever we're in this limbic to limbic uh, interactivity, we're we're setting it up as win lose, me against you. Now, a way uh, to combat that. I hate using the word combat here because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get into a cooperative mode. So a way to overcome that challenge or meet that challenge is to use something that we call non-complementary responses, and that's complementary with an E. Complimentary with an I is like, oh yeah, you look nice today, right? It's a compliment. But non-complimentary with an E means something that doesn't follow directly from what the other person does. And so that's a one of the secrets of turning a situation around. And so if someone attacks you with anger, even though your initial inclination is to be angry back, but if you can steel yourself or prepare yourself to respond, let's say, with overwhelming empathy or with curiosity, you interrupt their survival response. So here's a situation where that occurred. There's an educator. We'll call her Erin. She had to navigate a difficult situation with a parent. The parent was really frustrated because their child had not performed as well as they hoped at an event that Aaron was one of the judges. So the parent entered the conversation with an automatic, emotionally charged limbic response, and that would normally have triggered Aaron with the exact same response. But she was prepared this time, and she's like, the parent is going to come in hot, and I'm going to see if I can respond differently. So instead of getting defensive at trying to argue facts, which would have been a natural complementary response, Aaron chose to use non-complimentary approach. She led with empathy, and she made sure to validate the parents' feelings of frustration and finding some small initial point where they could agree on before moving the conversation forward. So the parent was, my child did this and they should have gotten this. And then Aaron's response was, oh, yes, I really respect the way you're, you're looking to, you're so concerned about the outcomes of your children, and let's work together to figure out how we can make that happen, which is so different from a response like, well, something, they got a bad grade on this because they did a pretty lousy job, right? And that may have been a truth, but that would not have moved the conversation forward. The non-complimentary statement was, wow, something, I can see that you are really concerned with your child, and I am too. So let's figure out a way. So, another example might be just de-escalating a tense family demand. So, let's call this person Laura, okay, whose grandfather was hospitalized, okay? So tensions were high, and her grandfather's wife aggressively insisted that Laura's father, who's also an adult, obviously, you know, that Laura's father and his brother share a single, full size bed at her house, and that was not okay with them. Okay. So, normally that they would have snapped back. It's like, hey, we made the trip over here to take care of him, and you're putting us up and telling us to sleep in the same bed. That's ridiculous. Um, but instead of snapping back or arguing against this unreasonable demand, which would trigger a fight or flight, the uncle used a calm, non-complimentary response based on something we'll go through it in a little bit later called nonviolent communications. He responded by saying, "Wow, I am really grateful for your willingness to host us in this unforeseen situation. I also feel, uncomfortable sharing a bed with my brother. Would you be open to another arrangement? Like perhaps I could use your couch." And by meeting her rigid demand first with gratitude, that basically disarmed her and completely bypassed her defenses. And once she was disarmed, she then got access to her own resourcefulness, her own brain, and she would immediately dropped the argument. So it's very important in these instances also to note that the other person's brain is not necessarily going to change, like that immediately. Very often they're going to be upset and they're going to make three, four, five more responses using their limbic fight, flight, freeze modes. And so when we use a non complementary response, very often we have to have it in our mind that it might take three, four, five, 10 different responses before their mirror neurons are firing enough to get them to calm down. And so, by maintaining your calm, sage mindset over several exchanges, their mirror neurons are going to eventually pick up on your feelings of safety. And that's going to make them feel safe and it's going to pull them out of their Olympic mode. So as we're talking about these different techniques and non-complementary um, you know non non-complementary conversations. These are in the book, the mind shifting conflict and collaboration book, and also in the mind shifting stop your brain from sabotaging your happiness and success book. Um, there's probably 20, 50 different ways of handling these types of situations, and we're just going to go through a couple of them today. So what the first was the non-complementary responses. The second is turning confrontation into collaboration with something called nonviolent communications. So when you need someone to change their behavior and you know that they might resist, okay, you can prevent a win-lose confrontation by making your statements using the methods of nonviolent communication, or NVC. NVC, nonviolent communication, allows you to make assertions that prompt engagement instead of triggering fight flight reactions. And it relies on four specific statements. So the first statement is articulate an observation. And this is stating what's happening in a neutral way without any judgment or blame. The first is you're articulating an observation. This is what's happening. The second statement is something that tells your feelings. It's articulating your feelings. You're going to express how the observation makes you feel. And we'll be going into these in greater depth in a second. The third is you articulate what your needs are, what in general you want to happen. And this is you're going to connect your feeling to some universal human need or shared value between you and the other person. And then finally, in number four, you're going to articulate a request. And remember the that uncle, you know, the statement, his initial statement was, "I feel grateful." That was the feeling part of it, for your willingness to host us. That was the situation. I feel uncomfortable sharing a bed. Okay, that was both the need and the feelings. And then, would you be open to letting me use your couch, which is articulating a request, a very clear actionable question that gives the other person agency. So here's an example where you're maybe addressing a politically charged family conflict. So a woman, let's call her Suzanne, uh, lives in a shared family farm with three generations, and her 83-year-old father placed a large politically charged protest sign on the property. And this sign caused anxiety because it was, very likely going to alienate the community and hurt the farm business. So to avoid a massive family fight, what Suzanne and her siblings did is they used nonviolent communication to create a structured conversation plan. They planned to neutrally observe the sign's placement, express their anxiety about the business and family unity, state their shared need for safety and mutual respect, and then make a collaborative request to find a message that reflects their shared values. So by using NVC, they were able to then have a conversation which is able to address the highly emotional issue while preserving family relationships and avoiding winners and losers debate. Um, and I think it's helpful to just go through a few more examples of how nonviolent communication could be used. So, here's navigating a shared space. A woman, let's call her Jackie. Okay, she needed a shared school space for an after-school event, but another colleague was still using it right up until the start time, and so there was going to be no time to do a setup. And tensions were already high because, like, the one you can imagine, one person is using the space and they're running over and they're feeling a little bit tense about that, and she has another event that's supposed to start, and they're eating into her time that. Her start time, and you're not giving her any time to set up. Both parties are feeling frustrated and defensive. So instead of reacting defensively, Jackie recognized the need to use nonviolent communications. She noted that by calmly stating her observation that the room was still being used, instead of like, "You're disrupting my class time," it's like, "Oh, the room is still being used." Then expressing her stress. I'm feeling a little stressful, and starting late is making me anxious. Stating her need for setup time, and when we do this, I need a certain amount of time in order to set up, and then making a request for a heads up in the future, so that she could keep the focus on collaboration. If you're going to be running, if you think you're going to be doing something that's running late, is there a way to let me know in advance so that we can work out, how both of our activities could run. So nonviolent communication helped her express how the last minute changes affected her without putting her colleague on the defensive. And that led to a much more realistic plan that met both of their needs. And then we probably all face this, the person who emails us late and expects a like at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, and expects us to jump to it and immediately comply. So let's say, the person, let's say Alex, has a manager that frequently sends him urgent messages at say at 8 o'clock p.m. and expects an immediate response. And of course, this leads to resentment, right, and burnout. So Alex noted that nonviolent communication allows a person to set a firm boundary while maintaining a positive professional relationship. So instead of a defensive, "I'm not on the clock" reaction, Alex framed it with, it's 8 o'clock right now. I'm feeling a little bit stressed because I'm doing certain things with my family. I need some downtime we all need downtime in order to stay productive, and I'm no exception to this. Is it possible that in the future that these messages be sent during the next business day? And so NVC transformed a vague demand, like, "Why are you always late, sending me this stuff late," into a very specific action. Could you send these, early in the day? And then, and then we can have a discussion based on it. So those are some examples of how one might use nonviolent communication to break that win-lose cycle, because you're making statements that tend to engage the other person rather than statements that tend to inflame the other person. And then, um, and then a third technique, because we talked about non-complimentary conversations, we talked about nonverbal communication, and now we'll talk about a third technique. And this is like, well, what do you do when you're already in a win-lose fight? You already talked to this person, they're upset, you feel your temperature rising, and you're getting upset. Well, what do you do when the conversation has already devolved into this limbic to limbic power struggle? And so in those cases, you have to use the interrupter and the self commander, which are again, mostly discussed in that first book, mind shifting, stop your brain from sabotaging your happiness and success. So how it works is you need a certain amount of self awareness to understand how do you feel when you start getting upset. Is it something in your stomach? Is it you feel something in your head? Is it you feel your temperature rise? How do you recognize that your own survival brain has been triggered? And that's what we would call the interrupter. Now, once you realize that you're in limbic mode, like, oh yeah, I'm upset. Oh yeah, I'm anxious. Sometimes that's going to be enough. Um, but very often you'll then want to do something to quiet your mind through some type of a pause. You could count count five by five to yourself. You could take a deep breath and exhale slowly. You could do some mindfulness, but just take a few seconds and do something to calm yourself down, and then start asking yourself some internal questions that allow you to focus on things that your resourceful brain would be engaged with. Questions like, who would I want to be in this situation? How could I respond with overwhelming empathy? How can I come up with things that will allow us both to work together? And by phrasing questions like that, those are open ended questions that you're asking yourself that engages your prefrontal cortex to start thinking of ways that you can do that. And it's just by starting to think of ways that you can do that, you're moving yourself into resourceful brain. So again, the three steps. First of all, is there's self-awareness. How do you know when you're being anxious? How do you know when you're being upset? Second, what can you do to take a break? Can you take a few breaths? Can you concentrate on the voice tone of the other person? Can you practice some mindfulness? Can you count to five? Not out loud. um, and then um, and then the third is asking yourself some questions which open yourself up and engage your resourceful brain. Like, how can I respond with overwhelming empathy? Or what could I say that could possibly get us moving in a better direction? Or what would make this discussion more meaningful or more fun for the two of us? So, some examples of how that might work. Um, so let's say there's a person, Mike, a teacher, dealing with a parent who unjustly criticized him during a virtual meeting, regarding evaluation results. So, in the past, when a teacher would criticize him, um, what he would do would be to immediately react in anger, like, how dare this person? I'm a professional, I'm a teacher. Um, so his old responses was to answer briefly and then remain completely silent because he was boiling, right? And he was afraid of escalating the situation. What he did this time is he used his self commander to intentionally pause. He heard the statement, paused, and basically said to himself, how could I stay in sage mode? How could I be empathetic to what this person is saying? And so it was like who he was at that moment. He realized he had been angry, but asking himself how he could be empathetic. And just by changing that mind frame from, oh, I realize I'm angry, self awareness, the pause, the deep breath, and then how could I be empathetic? He was able to then validate the parents' feelings without necessarily agreeing with them, and that helped the conversation, tone down and guided the discussion towards collaboration instead of shutting down. Or another example, let's say a person named Emma is dealing with a colleague who is highly resistant to implementing a new policy that the organization uh, was had implemented. And what she tried to do um, was, what she would do in the past is she would focus on what the other person was doing wrong. Like, oh, this is the policy. This is what you should be doing. This is the policy, and it calls for you doing this, but you're doing that. And then the two of them would then whoever the other person was would start reacting emotionally, right, to try and persuade each other to see their point of view, and that usually led to some tense, unproductive arguments. But what she did this time is she intentionally paused. She realized that she was getting upset and she accessed her sage mind, her resourcefulness. She leaned into something that we go into the books called motivational interviewing, and used reflective listening to honor the colleague's autonomy. So instead of saying you're doing this wrong, she started asking questions like, "What are you trying to accomplish? How are you doing this? How might what are some other ways of doing this?" And that the reason why that worked is that her affirmations reduced the other person's defensiveness and validated their expertise. The other person felt valued by stepping out of the expert role and getting upset and into open-ended questions. um, the talk about what they should change emerged naturally when the colleague identified some manageable next steps themselves, and then that seamlessly shifted the conversation from resistance to collaboration. So those are three different techniques, and we'll be talking about techniques similar to these as we run the practice labs, which are actually, the first practice lab is starting in 2 days, and Wednesday, and there's the QR code up on the screen. These practice labs, this one is going to be on the mind shifting, stop your brain from sabotaging your happiness and success book. It's going to be 4 weeks. Each week, we're going to be talking about 1 to 2 chapters, and you'll be interfacing with about 10, 12 other people. We'll break out into small groups, and we'll be talking about the different concepts and techniques, how you and other people might apply them. And so it'll be really a much better opportunity to practice some of the techniques in the books rather than just reading about them. So you can sign up on the QR code. It up on the screen. It talks about what we're going to be doing in the practice labs. We have actually we have 20 people who are signed up right now. And I know not everybody comes who signs up. So I'm expecting maybe 12, 14 people to come. And we should be having some really good conversations. Well, to wrap this up, we just went through three techniques you know, well, the win lose cycle. It's three techniques to counter that cycle. One being non complimentary conversation, two being nonviolent conversation, um, and the third is to use the interrupter and the self commander to put ourselves into resourceful mode so that we can start thinking about where we want the conversation to be going. And if you want to talk about those more, please join us in the practice lab. And thank you for joining Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch, and hope to see you next week. So this is Mitch Weisberg signing off for June 1st. Hope to see you on Wednesday and on June 8th when we have the next Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. Take care.